Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Host Kevin Gray, Mavs pre- and post-game host here on the Inside the Mavs podcast, joined as always by my partner, Grant Afseth. Really appreciate you joining us here on Inside the Mavs. Of course, you can catch Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth, covering the Dallas Mavericks for Sports Illustrated. You can catch me on your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball, 97.1 The Freak, your Mavericks pre- and post-game host. The Mavericks taking on the Denver Nuggets on a Monday night as they get ready to take on the reigning NBA champions. A difficult schedule over the next several days that we'll touch on during this episode. A little bit of trade rumor news to be able to touch on as well when it comes to a certain Detroit Pistons basketball big man that we'll touch on here as well. So a lot to get to in this episode, and also recapping a win for the Mavericks over the Portland Trail Blazers, defeating them for the second time in an 8-day span. Again, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Be sure to download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. As I bring in Grant on this Monday here, he is live in a cold Denver, Colorado this morning. What's going on, Grant? How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Definitely going to be an interesting week for us to talk about the Mavs with a tough schedule, and it's always fun when there's some trade buzz or things to discuss as well on that front. So I'm definitely looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, plenty to get to. Before we get there, let's take a quick look back at what happened this past weekend as the Mavericks were able to beat the Blazers for the second time in 8 days. They are able to go to Portland to get what was a 131-120 win over the Portland Trail Blazers to move to 16-9 on the season. Luka Doncic, absolutely spectacular. 40 points, 10 assists, 12 rebounds, another monster triple-double, his 61st career triple-double, also passing Dirk Nowitzki for most 35-point games in franchise history. It feels like every time Luka steps on the floor, he's making history in some shape, form, or fashion, and he did so as he went 15-28 from the field. The Mavericks dropping 131 points, shooting nearly 50% from the field. Derrick Jones Jr. had 18 points. Dante Exum, another strong game against the Portland Trail Blazers. But I'm sure, Grant, as you were there as well, the Mavericks are probably sick of playing in Portland because every time they go there, it seems like these days, they lose a guy due to injury. The first time, it was Kyrie Irving due to a heel contusion. And now, unfortunately, Dereck Lively II had to leave the game in the first half with a left ankle sprain. He is going to be out for the game against Denver on Monday night. But before we touch on that a little bit, what were your overall thoughts and takeaways from the Mavericks win against Portland on Saturday night?
Well, one of the big upsides was there wasn't a report that Dereck Lively left in a wheelchair. That was fake by
That's
Blazers
true.
TV. That was probably at the top of the list. But overall, I thought it was a very interesting game. Like the Blazers had a different look than what they had in that matchup that they faced the Mavs 8 days prior with DeAndre Ayton, Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon, all those veterans being in the lineup, and with Ayton, they played drop coverage for most of the first half. Luka ripped that apart as he always does, scoring 30 of his 40 points. And then after halftime, just the nightmares that guarding Luka can cause were on full display. It looked like Portland had a miscommunication on the first play out of halftime where, Ayton was supposed to be up closer to level, and he was in drop coverage. Luka made light work of that, scored, and then Chauncey Billups immediately called timeout and started talking with him about
18 seconds into the second half. He calls a timeout. I had never seen that before in an NBA game.
And then he had a conversation with him on the floor, and they weren't that Ayton wasn't that engaging with them. And then he had another conversation with him on the sideline, and he never gave him eye contact. So it was just that to just tell you the Luka Doncic experience for a defense right there. And then for the rest of the night, they started to really blitz Luka more aggressively, put him in those 4-on-3, hit the short roller, make a play situations, that the Mavericks often see. And, the first half was just very interesting because you normally do not see a team give an extended look unless they're desperate with their limitations. The last time I really remember too much of that, traditional big man drop coverage was really like New Orleans with Valanciunas before they got Herb Jones back in that 2-game series. So like that's not something you see a ton. So yeah, he definitely made easy work of that. And the rest of the team, when the blitzes started to happen, they really started to make plays. Dante Exum continues to make a big impact as that connective piece. And Markieff Morris played at the 5 more. He was a good relief option on the short roll, but also he showed the ability to space out. Yeah, on that in the corner whenever he wasn't the short roller, and they were using like Tim Hardaway as the screener to then play out of that. So I thought overall there was some good things out of that, and it'll be definitely put to the test against Denver, a much more potent team on their own home floor, for tonight's game for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned with Markieff Morris playing a season high over 19 minutes. That was because, unfortunately, Dereck Lively II got injured in the first half, spraining his left ankle, a big blow for this Mavericks team who has utilized his presence in the middle, whether it be for his rebounding, his shot blocking, his efficiency at the rim. He's going to be missed big time in this game against Denver, and we're unsure of how many games he's going to miss at this point because the Mavericks, they play on Monday, then they get back on the floor on Wednesday when they take on the Los Angeles Clippers. Then they have a back-to-back on Friday and Saturday against the Rockets and the Spurs. So it's going to be a quick turnaround to see how quickly Lively can get back on the floor. But as you mentioned, with Morris being able to stretch the floor, knocking down shots from the outside, being able to spread things out a little bit, playing that small ball 5 and being able to knock down shots, that worked well against Portland. The Mavericks bench was also really good, outscoring Portland's bench 52-38 in that game as well. As I mentioned, Dante Exum with another strong game in the starting lineup. He was able to go for he went for 25 points 18 points. Tim Hardaway Jr. had 25 points. I was thinking about Derrick Jones Jr. Both of them had 18. Derrick Jones had 18. Dante Exum had 18 as well, going 8 of 11 from the field in 27 minutes of play there. Tim Hardaway Jr., 25 points, going 5 of 15 from the field. Tim Hardaway Jr. never met a shot he didn't like. Taking 15 3-pointers, made 5 of them, but had 25 points off the bench, really helping that second unit be able to handle things against Portland. So the Mavericks are able to get their second win in 8 days on the road in Portland to move to 16-9 on the season, 9-4 away from the American Airlines Center. Again, the big blow in that game, of course, Dereck Lively missing the rest of the game with that left ankle sprain, which gets us to what's happening on Monday as the Mavericks take on a Denver Nugget team that right now sits 4th in the West. They are behind the Dallas Mavericks. Mavericks are 3rd in the West right now as it stands. You have Minnesota, Oklahoma City, who just beat Denver this past weekend on a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander bucket with 0.9 seconds left in that game to steal one in Denver. That means the Mavericks are 3rd right now in the West, and Denver is at number 4. And we know how good this team is, obviously, as the reigning NBA champions. These two teams have already seen each other once earlier on this year. The Mavericks losing in that game back on November the 3rd to Denver. What do you remember from that game that has to change against the Denver Nuggets this time around, even with the injuries that the Mavericks are dealing with right now?
Yeah, that one was a weird game. That was the game where Jason Kidd wasn't even the coach, with Sean Sweeney stepping in due to illness for Kidd. So that was an interesting one in of itself. And, they tried different looks against Jokic, which are going to be even more challenging to kind of throw out there. They tried Grant Williams guarding him and having Dereck Lively kind of be the roamer off the ball, kind of playing off of Aaron Gordon, since he's not like the most consistent or dynamic 3-point shooting threat out there. And I remember the Nuggets made them pay. They got up the floor very quickly, like guys like KCP, like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and even Aaron Gordon made them pay, for not really getting back and then getting into the ball early in transition. And then, Jokic does what Jokic does, where he, draws multiple defenders, makes you pay with the pass. And a lot of times, the Mavericks just didn't have that perimeter size that we always talk about, where, whether it's Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot being physical, or Michael Porter Jr., driving off the catch, or just having that high release point on, spacing from the 3 when he gets the ball. there's just some real limitations that the Mavericks have. And it's going to be even more challenging to account for all of that when you don't have that 7-footer shot blocker to provide some of that presence. And, just thinking back as well to that Trailblazers game, one of the factors that will need to carry over against Denver is that bench production. As you mentioned, Tim Hardaway Jr. at 25 points, but also Seth Curry had some, sequences where he had, some successful creation plays and, that helped push the Mavs forward. And a big example of that was that first half. The Mavericks were actually down 39-36 at the end of the first quarter. And then out of the break with Luka on the sidelines, they had a 10-0 run, with, Tim Hardaway and Seth Curry kind of shouldering that load. So they'll need sequences like that with shot making luck going their way. Because if threes don't fall against the Nuggets, on the road, that's going to be a very challenging, set of circumstances. And they don't have that, key talent inside to help overcome, that shot, variance that, a team may face on a given night where you don't have that guy who's going to pull in offensive boards, really make the other team think twice about attacking the rim, because they were really ineffective protecting the rim against Portland after Lively went down. So overall, it's that's just really kind of portrays the importance of Dereck Lively for the Mavs. And, it's just fascinating to continue to see that. I know that's not the focus right now, but as a 19-year-old, that's being that important. That's definitely a fascinating situation considering our original expectations for, what his role may be and everything when he was first drafted. So that's definitely going to be a display of, appreciate what you have when you don't have it.
Yeah, it's tough. You mentioned the 125-114 loss the Mavericks had back on November the 3rd. And one of the things that we know about Denver is how long they are. They've got a lot of athleticism when it comes to guys like Michael Porter Jr. You mentioned Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He is dealing, with a little bit of concussion protocol, I believe, when it comes to his availability, coming back as far as that's concerned. As I look at the injury report, the early one going into the game on Monday, Dallas looking like they may have a question with Richaun Holmes as well. Looking at Denver, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope questionable as he's dealing, with a concussion. We'll see if he's available tonight when they take on, the Dallas Mavericks. But at the same time, Denver is always tough because you look at what the offensive hub of what Nikola Jokic is, his ability to pass, his ability to set up his teammates for himself, also with his own offense. Guys are able to knock down shots with Jamal Murray. There's a lot of ways that this team can attack you in multiple ways. Christian Brown as well, good player for them off the bench. There's a lot of things that they do to put pressure on you, and with the lack of size that the Mavericks are going to be dealing with tonight, if they don't have Richaun Holmes, who's questionable as he's dealing with, a non-COVID related illness, they're going to be really, really shorthanded on that front court. And I'm not sure how they deal with all of that when it comes to Jokic, because with Lively already being out, Dwight Powell undersized, Richaun Holmes may not be available as well. You're looking at a lineup that I don't know who you play at the 5 in that particular situation, because based off what you have right now, that doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea to have Markieff Morris out there as your small ball 5 trying to do something with Nikola Jokic. Maybe the idea of a lot of zone coverage, maybe what the doctor ordered tonight, to try to keep things in front of them, because if they try to go any type of man or anything else, they're going to get eaten alive by the Nuggets in that way.
You're going to have to hope that Markieff Morris wants to get revenge for what Jokic did to his brother when he was with the Heat. That's probably that might be on the list of things that you want or have to think about on the bulletin board there. But no, seriously, for sure. I think you're probably going to have to do what Jason Kidd likes to say whenever they give up a lot of points, which is your offense might have to be your defense. And a lot of 3-point shooting. And that's where, it's not a genius thought, but that's a night where not having Kyrie Irving really is a challenge because that's going to be a floor raiser to where, if he goes off on a given night and puts a lot of pressure on the Nuggets, then you're going to have an easier time, having that ability to overcompensate for a lack of defensive production. But even then, without Kyrie, there's going to be situations where you're probably going to see Luka getting the ball forced out of his hands, and it's going to put even more stress on the rest of the unit to hit shots. And so that it could be a very big range of outcomes when it comes down to that in any given game in the NBA. So it'll be interesting. Tim Hardaway, as we mentioned, Tim Hardaway Jr., Seth Curry, all of those guys are going to be needed. But I think a big factor tonight, as you said, or highlighted against the Blazers, was Dante Exum, but then also Derek Jones. Those are the guys that could kind of mix it up more than anyone else in the supporting cast in terms of putting the ball on the floor to attack closeouts, really push the pace and transition and make plays. Those guys will be especially important to kind of provide that different look throughout the course of a game, especially if threes aren't falling for sure.
Yeah, they're going to have to knock down a bunch of them to keep themselves close in this game because they're going to get, it appears, punished in the paint pretty good based off of the lack of personnel that they have. But anytime you've got 77 on the floor, you're going to have a chance to win a ball game. That is just how good and how talented Luka Doncic is. We saw what he's been able to do over the last several games. We talked about it a little bit throughout the last couple of shows in terms of the heavy workload that Luka Doncic continues to shoulder. He was able to play 36, 37 minutes in the game against Portland, this past weekend. So not the over 40 minutes that we've seen him play over the last several games. He was able to get a little bit more extended rest, especially in the first half, to be able to help. And you talked about that run that the Mavericks were able to go on when he went off and sat on the bench for those 5-6 minutes to be able to really get things going in the right direction there. He's probably going to have to play a lot of minutes tonight. I would expect over 40 minutes tonight if they're trying to get a win, unless, unfortunately, they're getting blown out in some scenario. I would expect Luka Doncic to play heavy minutes tonight. As you mentioned, no Kyrie Irving as well. He's going to have to shoulder all the offensive and facilitation for this Mavericks offense tonight. I expect Luka Doncic to play at least 40 to 42 minutes, if not more, depending on how the game is going against Denver.
Yeah, definitely. And that's going to be a thing to watch throughout the rest of this week as well. Like, bringing up the upcoming schedule, you got the Clippers, who are really thriving as of late as well since that first meeting where the Mavericks had that blowout win when I think they were like playing their fourth game with James Harden at the time. And then Houston's very challenging on their home floor as well. And, then the second out of a back-to-back is always, regardless of opponent, is always something to keep in mind, which will be against the San Antonio Spurs. So overall, definitely going to be an interesting thing to track those minutes. I think, after the Portland Trailblazers, win, Luka did mention that, he's fine playing those minutes, but he's always someone that wants to play 48 minutes, regardless of, how the game's going or his, physical state with injuries. So definitely they're going to have to monitor that. As they mentioned before, Jason Kidd in his pregame media availability mentioned wanting to, lower those minutes when possible. But I just think as long as Kyrie Irving is sidelined, however long that may be, it's going to be challenging to be able to, really trust that second unit in extended periods to give Luka resting opportunities, especially in the second half of games.
Mavericks take on the Denver Nuggets on Monday night with pregame beginning at 7:30 and the tip-off at 8 o'clock at Ball Arena when the Mavericks take on the Denver Nuggets. We'll see. Something's got to give because the Mavericks, who have the best road record in the NBA right now at 9-4, are taking on a Denver Nugget team that's got a 10-2 record at home this year. So something's got to give tonight at Ball Arena because these two teams know each other very well, with two of the biggest stars in the game today, and Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. Always fireworks when those two get together on the same floor. Always a lot of fun, too, because those two enjoy each other's company, as we've seen over the last several years. Let's turn our attention to some news for the Mavericks off the floor. When it comes to personnel moves, we saw some interesting information coming from James Edwards of The Athletic, who covers the Detroit Pistons, saying that teams like the Dallas Mavericks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Boston Celtics are going to be showing strong interest in forward/center Isaiah Stewart of the Detroit Pistons, which is interesting because Stewart goes about 6'8", 235, 240, somewhere in that range. And I saw some reaction initially. I don't think Mavericks fans are looking for another undersized, quote unquote, center, if you will, to be a part of this particular lineup. They feel like they have enough of those already. But let's just walk down that road a little bit in terms of that trade rumor, as December 15th became the quote unquote unofficial start, if you will, of the trade season, as the February 10th date is the trade deadline for the NBA. There are now deals that can be made starting as of December 15th. You've already had a little bit of a write-up for yourself when it comes to Isaiah Stewart and what he is as a player. What intrigues you as a player for Isaiah Stewart, and what fit could he have with the Mavericks, if that's something that they're seriously considering here?
Yeah, I think when you're weighing pros and cons, I think what you like is Isaiah Stewart's a physical option that's going to provide, rebounding on both ends. And he's going to be able to handle those like more power player type of options. Like against a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves, you're probably going to get more resistance from Isaiah Stewart than your typical like power forward option. He can play some small ball 5 as well. But overall, I think it's definitely one of those situations where you have to weigh the undersized element. He's not that shot blocker, imposing the presence that's going to deter drives, in the paint that the Mavericks ideally would find for a second unit option. And then he's also not that, reliable of a 3-point shooter. He's improved, but in taking like 3.2 attempts per game, shooting, I think below or just below 35%, but he's not going to be that knockdown option where you're going to space him out to the corner or run a lot of pick and pop for him and expect, like consistent success. So that kind of leaves you in a spot where if he's not necessarily going to be that rim protector and he's not going to give you that 5 out and really enhance that sort of option, then you're kind of, I guess, in a way, mostly looking at rebounding impact. But I think for the greater context, you have to also weigh how the Pistons have operated in terms of trade conversations in recent years under Troy Weaver's front office. They usually ask for a lot, and not many guys end up moving. Like Bojan Bogdanovic is a perfect example. They had a very high asking price throughout last season. The trade deadline came. They didn't move him. And now, he had injury problems to start this year. They're a terrible team, and there's no way you would really expect the trade price to be what they could have got last year. And, Isaiah Stewart also is going to start that 4-year, $60 million, extension next season, which, kind of complicates the finances of a trade as well for this season, since he hasn't started that extension. And then you also have to weigh that, like, next season, the estimate is that he'd be 10% of the salary cap spending obligations for, whatever team he lands on based off of the projections for the salary cap. And, overall, when you're building a team around like a Luka and a Kyrie who are already on those like large contracts, and you have to really weigh and consider, is that the exact type of skill set that you want? And, I think there are better fits, especially if you factor in the likelihood of Detroit having that higher asking price than probably what the market would truly want to pay, for him. And then you get into a situation where there are players that are overperforming their current contracts, like Dante Exum strongly outperforming his contract, Derek Jones as well. And I would think that if you're comparing the skill sets there, a player like Derek Jones would be more impactful to success for how the Mavs play than, Isaiah Stewart. And then you also have to deal with, overall just those long-term projections. And then in the future, you are going to have to pay Dereck Lively at some point as well. I know that's a crazy thing to think about when he just started, but at some point, the timelines don't necessarily clash like that, but you also have to be positioning yourself at all times for optimize salary cap sheet if you have your general manager hat on. So overall, it's gonna be interesting to see what the trade ends up being if it does happen, because I'm always fascinated by some of these teams with their asking prices. And not to ramble too much, but one thing just relevance for trade conversations or just interest, or just player interest, I should say, in the past with Detroit has been, they were one of the teams that were interested in Tim Hardaway Jr. before he signed with the Mavs, and they're a team that's very devoid of shooting. So, I don't think I would value the skill set that Stewart provides over Hardaway. So that also is another factor when you really analyze your current roster versus another roster. If you're the Dallas Mavericks, that's, it gets kind of iffy on what you would part with to make a trade of that nature.
Yeah, and a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., who's made himself extremely valuable with his Sixth Man of the Year, campaign so far, averaging 17, 18 points off the bench. As we mentioned, just had 25 the other night off the bench, for the Mavericks in their win over the Trailblazers. He's a guy who's a valued commodity on this team, and he's got a really nice contract, one of those descending contracts that makes it very attractive for a team that may be looking for shooting help to maybe go after him as far as the Mavericks are concerned. And, Stewart right now dealing with a shoulder injury as well. He's not going to play against the Atlanta Hawks when they take on the Hawks on Monday. And the guy that right now is averaging a little over 10 points, nearly 7 rebounds per game. Right now, the third leading rebounder on his own team. So when we talk about the production from a rebounding standpoint, this is a guy even at 6'8", maybe not performing or rebounding, especially at the type of rate that you need to, because this is another thing that the Mavericks would need in terms of any type of, shot blocking, rim protection as far as the second unit is concerned. Somebody that can also help rebound the basketball. For a guy his size, he's listed at 250, and 6'8", doesn't rebound the basketball at the kind of rate that you feel like could be productive or would be something that a team would look for in terms of a high asking price. I'm not trying to give up a lot if I'm trying to get, Isaiah Stewart in that way, if I feel like I need him, especially, again, only shooting 45%, from the field as well. So very interesting that I thought that the three teams that Edwards named, being the Thunder, the Celtics, and the Mavericks, because two of those teams are not like the Mavericks when it comes to the Thunder and the Celtics. Thunder have a bunch of assets for days and days and days. Celtics have a little bit more flexibility as well. You look at the Mavericks, not necessarily the type of capital and flexibility that you would think based off of what they may be trying to do to improve their roster. I could see a team like the Thunder taking a flyer on a Stewart because, well, they got a bazillion assets that they can move around if they need to in that way. Mavericks not necessarily in that position from an asset management standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at the other team on the list, the Celtics, they've positioned themselves to have a very expensive roster as it is.
Yeah.
So that would be very challenging after bringing in Porzingis. So, I think if you just look at those three teams, I think the Thunder would definitely make the most sense for that type of trade. They have, as you mentioned, with the many assets that they have, at some point they'll have to consolidate those, whether it's just here and there with smaller trades or taking a swing at a bigger name player, whether that's like OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Lauri Markkanen, any of those types of players that they could plug into their core and like enhance what they've got going on. That's definitely also another factor to consider too. Is it's like if they want to take that big blockbuster trade approach, do you really want to part with like smaller assets for a trade now to kind of just plug one hole, or would you rather just make your big swing trade at some point and then worry about how you're plugging the rest of the roster in? So that'll definitely be something interesting to watch around the NBA over the next couple of years, just how teams like, not only Oklahoma City, but also like those other teams with a lot of picks, like New Orleans has some picks. Houston has a lot of picks from the James Harden trade. Utah has a lot of picks from moving off of Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. And for all we know, at some point they could, sell high on Lauri Markkanen and get even more and have like a crazy assortment of picks, or war chest, I should say, for the long term. So overall, it's going to be interesting to see how teams continue to build. But the Mavericks only having that 2027 first-round pick available to trade midseason in terms of outright first-round draft capital as trade chips. It's going to be limited options, I would say, for midseason trades, especially if you consider the types of contracts you'd have to include. You probably are now reluctant to move Tim Hardaway based off of what he's provided compared to where the situation was during the summer when he was in those offseason trade rumors. And it was mostly, I would say, because the team really needed a center, not as much as where it's like we just have to get rid of Tim Hardaway Jr. Because when you're bringing in a rookie who many perceive as being raw, continuing to develop his game at the start of his career at 19 years old, the general concept would probably be you want to be patient, bring him along and get that veteran center, whether it was like that Clint Capella option that was reported or, DeAndre Ayton that was also mentioned. But we're in a different situation if you're looking at the Mavericks perspective now compared to then with Lively being that, locked in starting center who's overachieving in his rookie season. So then it's more about what other needs would you have, probably a bigger wing as we always like to talk about, with that perimeter size, which we could see as an issue tonight against the Denver Nuggets, for all we know, based off how that game plays out.
That's right.
But then you get into the situation of how many teams have a big wing and are looking to get smaller, parting with that wing, that very talented player who's this hypothetical option, that gets smaller for Tim Hardaway. Probably not out there unless you're overcompensating with other assets. So it gets interesting when you think about roster options and things like that. But definitely back to our original point with Isaiah Stewart, I personally don't think that's the type of player that I would be targeting, especially with limitations of the assets that you have midseason.
Yeah, just for me, not enough production there. Already injury concerns, as I mentioned, and a guy that, based off what the Mavericks have in terms of roster construction right now, I don't see them adding yet another undersized, center, even with him being at 6'8", maybe some flexibility there at the 4 spot, but I don't see necessarily that being the type of move that the Mavericks would see a real immediate impact on this team based on their win now mode that they are in, moving forward in the West. But hey, it is trade rumor season already now, as we are a few days in, as the trade deadline is February the 10th. I'm sure there will be plenty more conversation on this podcast, of course, on Inside the Mavs, and more when it comes to any potential rumored news when it comes to the Mavericks making a move. Real quick, last couple minutes here, because we touched on a little bit earlier. Difficult schedule here over the next 4 games. Nuggets on Monday. They got the Clippers on Wednesday. They've got the Rockets on Friday as part of a back-to-back with the Rockets and the Spurs at home, and then on the road, at Houston, and then back at home, one of the two. They play the Rockets and the Spurs in back-to-back games. If they can go 2-2 in that stretch, I'm happy there. What are your expectations quickly when it comes to that stretch of games over the next 4 that they have there?
Yeah, I think with how shorthanded they could be, because we still don't really have exact timetables on a lot of those guys, the key guys, especially with Kyrie and Dereck Lively. I think 2-2 would be a great record. You just basically have to not slide in the standings too far, just kind of stay afloat a little bit, get back to closer to full strength, and then build some momentum closer to the new year is kind of my general thought on that for sure.
Yeah, so it goes at Denver, back at home against the Clippers, and then on the road to Houston, and then back at home against San Antonio. So basically they're alternating home and road games for the next 4 games with Denver, Los Angeles, Houston, and San Antonio. So that kind of gives you an idea, not just of the schedule, but some of the travel that's going to be involved there as well, where the schedule, and this is how we'll end today, the schedule has not been very kind to the Dallas Mavericks through the first 25 games of the season, based off of some of the back-to-backs that they've had, some of the odd road home back-to-backs that they've had. They've had a really odd schedule.
And getting Portland added to the schedule. The furthest, Brad Townsend, I was talking to him before the game. He said that it's statistically the furthest mileage city from Dallas. Boston is very a close second, but Portland was literally the furthest possible city they could have picked. So it's like that's the definition of bad luck for a random game to be added for a road game. That's rough.
And then having to do it again in an 8-day span, go back out to Portland to do that again. It's just a really odd schedule for them. But as I mentioned, at Denver on Monday, back home against the Clippers on Wednesday. Then they play on the road against Houston on Friday. And then as a part of a back-to-back, they play at home against San Antonio. Oh, and then, by the way, shout out to Christmas Day. They'll be on the road in Phoenix to take on the Phoenix Suns. That game tipping off at 9:30 on Christmas Day on Monday. So really difficult schedule that they've got over the next several games here. We'll see how the Mavericks play that out. Grant, tell the folks so they can find you what you got going on these days, man.
Well, one thing, it might be a tough schedule for the Mavericks, but Inside the Mavs will be able to handle it for sure.
That's right. I like what you're doing there. That's good. That's right, for sure.
You can find all my stuff, as always, on DallasBasketball.com. I'll have plenty of content from this Nuggets matchup. And then throughout the rest of this, interesting stretch, as there's injury updates, especially. I know people love those. So, very important players as well. So I'll put everything that gets provided and put out there and available as it happens on there and on social media as well. So definitely going to be a busy week ahead and lots of coverage from it for sure.
You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to Inside the Mavs wherever you get your podcast for free on iHeartRadio. Give the podcast a 5-star rating, write a review for it while you're there. Inside the Mavs is the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. I'll be getting you ready for pregame coverage on Monday night at 7:30 p.m. with tip-off at 8 o'clock in Denver as the Mavericks with the best road record in the NBA taking on the reigning NBA champion Denver Nuggets, who are 10-2 at Ball Arena this year. Should be a lot of fun with Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic getting together. Again, a difficult stretch for the Mavericks to show us basically what they've got, being shorthanded with all the injuries that they're dealing with, what they can do over the next several games. We'll be back on Wednesday here for another episode of Inside the Mavs. We'll recap what happened on Monday against the Denver Nuggets. We'll get you ready for the Clippers game as the Mavericks return home to the American Airlines Center. We will update you, obviously, on the injury status of Dereck Lively and also Kyrie Irving. So a lot to get to on our Wednesday show as well, recapping again what happened in Denver and then getting ready for the Clippers game on Wednesday night. For Grant Afseth, my name is Kevin Gray. This has been Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. We'll talk to you on Wednesday.